Today we actually want to try to explain a little how we feed our ants, or at least some very common species. Most colonies you probably will start with a queen, which you then get in a test tube like this one here. And then the first question is if the queen needs food during foundation or not. Most common ants or easy to keep ants probably won't need food until they have their first workers. And then afterwards, it always depends on the species, of course. When you have the test tube with the first workers, it's always helpful to get you some talcum, for example. Because when you feed them, they try to escape always, which is quite annoying when feeding. And this way they'll fall down if they try to climb up. Other than that, we actually use a syringe to give them just a tiny little drop of honey in the test tube. Always make sure to feed only a very little amount, because if you feed too much, the food will turn bad. And then you have to change the test tube always, which is not really helpful. Then most species, of course, need a protein source. For small colonies, you can use our cricket jam, for example, because you can just scoop up a tiny little bit of it. Yeah, and for bigger colonies, we'll move on and show you what we got. Okay, so here we have Camponotus nicobarensis. It's like 3 years old probably, so quite big. They have 3 ant farms by now, and yeah, probably a couple thousand. You can see their nest over here. This here is probably where the queen is, which you can identify quite well because you see the tiny eggs there, not only the big cocoons, but also tiny ones. Camponotus ants usually need a sugar source and a protein source. And as all ants, a water source, of course. You can either use fresh water, or some people tend to feed a sugar solution, which also has enough water usually for the ants. For small colonies, we have this tiny drinker here. For bigger ones, and also if you want to go on holidays for a couple of days, we have a bigger option, of course. And then for huge colonies, we offer this one here. Then for the sugar source, we either have our honeydew mix, which is actually accepted by most ants. Then we have either a sugar solution, so sugar with water mixed, or a sugar honey solution. Some is preferred by some ants, some by others. You have to try out, or you also find some information on our ant descriptions on the website. Forest honey, for example, or rainforest, desert, or meadow honey, depending on where the ant comes from. For protein, we actually like to use either our cricket jam or our blanched crickets. They're mite-free and easy to use. You can also, after opening, freeze them for them to be good longer. We also have our candy ant snacks, for example, which is simply crickets with a little honey on it, which is then accepted quite well by most ants. Yeah, and then for the food, of course, we have different feeder options. For example, we have those ones here with a small sponge, which you can also use for honey, or you simply take the sponge out and use it for protein. You can also use our tiny drinkers actually quite well for honey, because they don't leak. And also for bigger colonies, it's easier to feed honey in there, because filling a small feeder like this one with honey, they tend to die in there. They stick in the honey, and yeah. And then we also have bigger feeders, of course, for bigger colonies, just to make it easier to feed them. Then we have our Lasius niger colony. They are in a standard combi cube. They also, like Camponotus species, need water, a sugar source, and a protein source, which then could be cricket jam or blanched crickets. For small colonies, we rather use the cricket jam. For bigger colonies, the blanched cricket, because bigger colonies tend to work with the food more than small ones. We put them here on the stand, so it's easier to connect the ant farms with the arena actually. This is also one of our main beginner species, Messor barbarus. And Messor barbarus is a little different when it comes to feeding. They need grains actually. They're grain collecting ants and also don't really take sugar or honey that much. They need water, of course, but they usually only take a sugar solution if they don't have enough water to feed on. We actually have 3 different options: minor, media and major grains. The small ones are usually used for starter colonies. The bigger ones you should only use if your colony has grown and you also have major workers already, like the bigger ones with the big heads, because those grains probably won't be used by small colonies with small workers only. They can't carry them, they can't break them down, so they rather use the minor seeds. And then the media seeds can be used in the beginning as well, but I'd rather recommend you to get the minor ones. Messor barbarus will collect their seeds here in their arena where we feed them, and then they bring them to their ant farm and store them there to make a so-called ant bread out of it, which they can keep much longer. In nature, they would feed on it in winter time when they can't get fresh seeds outside. Polyrhachis, like Lasius, for example, or also Camponotus, needs water, protein and sugar. It's pretty much the same like with the other ones. Small colonies, you would rather use cricket jam, something easy for them to break down, or you can also, for example, cut up mealworms or crickets. That also works. I rather recommend also to feed dead insects and not living ones, because hunting and feeding insects, especially in small setups, also stresses out the ants. So rather use dead insects. That's just easier for the ants to feed on. Paraponera clavata. The bullet ant from South America, probably one of the most famous ants out there because of their size and their sting, which can be very painful. Those ones are so-called Ponerine ants. Ponerine ants usually hunt in nature. They're very specialized on hunting. They also go on solo hunts, not like Lasius or Camponotus, which usually, if they hunt in packs. They're super specialized on live food. Some of them you can get used to dead insects as well. That's what we did with our Paraponera. We feed them dead crickets actually. For small colonies you can also use fruit flies. That works quite well, but those guys really like to hunt. The other difference here is, like also with most Ponerine ants, during foundation they already need food. So you can't simply keep the queen in a test tube without food until the first workers are there. You need to feed it directly. And they also like honey, of course, or honeydew also works well. And then protein, either live food or you get them used to dead insects as well, which works. They're actually hiding right now. Those ants rather in nature as well come out during the mornings or evenings. And they're quite shy, so they're hiding somewhere under the branches there. So the last species we want to show you is a very different one. This is a leafcutter ant, Atta. They actually feed off plant matter. So they cut leaves in nature from different plants. You can actually also find some information on what plants to use on our website. We feed them blackberry leaves, usually, or raspberry, something like that. And they cut them over here and then transport them back to the nest to feed it to a fungus. And most of the colony lives off the fungus. They don't need protein that much. They sometimes catch small insects in nature as well, but not that much. We don't really feed them protein at all. They also don't really need honey, so important for them is only water and then plant matter to cut down. That's their long way back to their nest, which is also quite important for them. They need at least some space to walk back to their nest. Just makes the colony healthier. And then this back here is where they have their fungus and their nest, and that's where they bring all the cut down leaves and they simply chew it to feed off the fungus in the end. Fungus is usually growing according to the colony size. So when the colony grows, the fungus also grows. When the fungus shrinks, that's not good for the colony, and usually at least some ants die because there's not enough food for everyone. So I hope you were all able to learn something of the video today, and we could answer some of your questions. If there's more, simply comment, and we do our best to answer them as well.